Victor Thorne doesn't do webinars. His assistant had warned him that morning. But here he was, millionaire founder of Thorne Tech, sitting in front of a ring light in his Manhattan penthouse, forced to smile at a screen full of tiny squares filled with strangers. Investors had begged him to speak at the live tech innovation seminar, and after enough boardroom pressure and a promise that it would only be 30 minutes, he agreed. Victor didn't care for attention. Not this kind, anyway. He liked to work in silence and let his company's numbers speak for themselves. But halfway through his talk about AI integration in consumer software, something changed. A soft voice filtered through his headset. "Hi, I have a question." He glanced at the name under the video tile, Vanessa Avery. Her face appeared on the screen. Big hazel eyes. Dark curls pulled into a loose bun. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, no professional lighting, no fake background, just her sitting cross-legged on a couch in what looked like a small apartment. But there was something about her that made his pulse skip. "Yes," Victor said, leaning forward before he realized it. "Go ahead. Your company's algorithm suggests personalization, but how do you ensure it doesn't just reinforce bias?" she asked, calm, direct, intelligent. It wasn't just the question that caught his attention, it was how she asked it. Like she wasn't trying to impress him, but challenge him. No flattery, no fluff. Victor blinked. "That's a fair point, one we're actively working on, would you?" He hesitated, surprised at himself. "Would you mind emailing me your thoughts on it?" She smiled, a little surprised. Sure, I wasn't expecting a homework assignment, but okay." The moderator laughed nervously. "And that's all the time we have today. Big thanks to Victor Thorne for joining us." Victor's screen went dark, but his mind stayed on that one square, that voice, that question, that woman. He didn't usually chase anyone. But that night he asked his assistant to find her email. Vanessa didn't expect a reply. She definitely didn't expect one from Victor Thorne himself. She'd sent the email half-jokingly, assuming it would disappear into the void. But the next morning her inbox dinged. "Vanessa, you raised a valid concern. I'd like to hear more. Dinner this week." Victor Thorne, she read it 5 times, then once out loud. "Dinner?" she whispered to herself. Her best friend Zoe, who was staying over, peeked over her cereal bowl. "Wait, is that the Victor Thorne, like the Millionaire software guy?" Vanessa stared at the screen. "Yeah. That Victor Thorne." He picked her up in a sleek black Aston Martin, the kind of car that didn't belong in her quiet Brooklyn neighborhood. Victor stepped out, wearing a dark gray suit with no tie, his sleeves rolled just enough to show the edge of an expensive watch. He looked like he belonged in a magazine ad for power and mystery. "Hi," he said, offering his hand, no arrogance, just calm confidence. "Hi," she said, trying not to let her nerves show. The restaurant he took her to wasn't just fancy, it was the kind that didn't have a menu. Just a chef who made whatever he wanted, and somehow it was always perfect. They talked for hours, about technology. About her part-time job teaching coding to kids. About how she dropped out of grad school because she couldn't afford tuition, but still read academic journals for fun. "You're brilliant," Victor said halfway through dessert. Vanessa laughed. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "I know enough," he said, eyes locked on hers. She felt it then. The shift. The pull. Over the next few weeks, Victor made time for her, always in person, always deliberate. He flew her to a private vineyard in Napa for lunch. Not dinner, lunch. Because he said he didn't want to wait until night to see her. He showed up at the community center where she taught kids to code, bringing 10 brand new laptops for the class with no fanfare. Just placed them on the table and said, "These should help." She tried to call him out on it later. "You don't have to impress me." "I'm not," he said. "I'm trying to support what matters to you." Every time she challenged him, he never flinched, he just listened. And slowly, she let the walls down. One evening, they were walking through Central Park, her hand tucked in his. It had become their routine. No cameras, no press, just them. "I still don't get why you asked me out," Vanessa said. "You probably get pitched by venture capitalists and models every day." He stopped walking. "I've been in rooms full of people who wanted something from me," Victor said. You're the first person who asked me a question that made me feel seen. Vanessa looked up at him. I didn't expect you, he said quietly. But now that you're here, I can't stop thinking about you, her heart pounded. Victor. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Vanessa froze. Wait, what? He opened it. Inside was a single silver chain with a delicate pendant and abstract design that looked like a circuit board turned into a heart. It's not a ring, he said, reading her expression. Not yet, but I wanted you to know I'm not playing games, I'm in this. Vanessa swallowed hard. You barely know me. I know enough to want to know everything. She looked at the necklace, then at him, then she nodded. Later that night, lying in his arms at his penthouse, the skyline glittering outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Vanessa whispered, "This is insane." Victor pulled her closer. "Yeah," he said, "but doesn't it feel real?" And somehow it did. The first time Vanessa stepped into Victor's office, she felt like she'd walked into a different universe. Not just because of the sweeping views of the Hudson River stretching behind the glass walls, or the way the floor was silent despite the dozens of people working just outside. It was the way everything stopped when he looked at her. He stood from behind his desk, a dark button-down rolled to his elbows, his jaw shadowed like he hadn't slept much, but his eyes lit up the moment she entered. "You're early," he said, closing the distance between them with quiet purpose. "You said you wanted to introduce me to your team," Vanessa replied, sliding her bag from her shoulder. "I figured I shouldn't be late to that." Victor's lips curved slightly, but not in amusement, it was something more like relief. "Come on. They've been trying to guess who you are since you walked past the reception desk." She followed him through a private corridor that opened into a sleek glass-walled conference room. A dozen executives sat inside, laptops open, coffees half-finished. The room fell quiet as Victor walked in, Vanessa just behind him. "This is Vanessa Avery," he said, placing a hand gently at her back. "She's joining us as a consultant for the new ethics branch. I think you'll find her insights refreshingly unfiltered." There was a pause, then a few polite nods. One man with neatly parted hair and a steel watch spoke first. "You're the one who asked the question during the seminar," he said. Vanessa met his gaze. "Guilty." He raised an eyebrow and leaned back in his chair. "Well, let's hope you've got more of those." Victor didn't say anything, but the faintest tension left his shoulders. After the meeting, they walked back through the office in silence until they reached the elevator. As the doors closed, Vanessa looked at him. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Give me a title, a role, a place." "I didn't do it for you," Victor said. "I did it because you belong in those rooms." She stared at the numbers descending on the panel and exhaled slowly. "I'm not used to doors opening like that." Victor turned to her. "Then get used to it." That evening, he surprised her again. She'd been expecting a quiet dinner, maybe at the apartment or some intimate corner of the city. Instead, he picked her up in a charcoal overcoat and handed her a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked, sliding into the car beside him. "Open it." Inside was a ticket, a private concert, one night only. A name she recognized immediately, a cellist she'd loved since college, someone she'd only ever listened to through headphones while studying in cramped libraries. "You remembered," she whispered. Victor looked out the window, his expression unreadable. "You mentioned her once. I figured you should hear her live." The concert wasn't in a traditional venue. It was held in a converted cathedral, all vaulted ceilings and candlelit aisles. Victor didn't speak during the performance, but his hand never left hers. When the final note echoed into silence, Vanessa felt like something inside her had shifted. Outside, the cold air bit at her skin. She turned to him as they walked toward the car. "I don't know how to explain it," she said. "Everything feels bigger with you." Victor rested his hand on her cheek. "You make things feel real again." The next morning, Vanessa arrived at her apartment to find a large box on her doorstep. Inside were high-end monitors, ergonomic keyboards, and a note written in Victor's unmistakable handwriting. "If you're going to consult, you should have the right tools. Set it up how you want." She stood for a long moment, staring at the equipment with a strange weight in her chest. It wasn't the extravagance that got her, it was that he saw her clearly enough to know she'd never ask for it, but needed it all the same. But the high of that morning didn't last. Later that day, while reviewing a draft of the company's new AI policy, Vanessa came across an internal report buried in a shared document folder. It wasn't meant for her eyes, she could tell by the access restrictions she bypassed, but the contents made her stomach twist. A project labeled Millionaire was in development months before Victor's seminar appearance. The same personalization algorithm he'd discussed, but this version was designed to collect not just data from users' choices but their biometric feedback, eye movement, facial tension, micro-expressions. All to predict emotional receptivity. She scrolled further. The project hadn't been paused. It had been renamed and fast-tracked. When Victor called that night, she didn't answer. He showed up at her apartment an hour later. "I knocked 3 times, he said, leaning in the doorway. "You didn't come to the office today." Vanessa crossed her arms. "Why didn't you tell me about Millionaire?" Victor's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes flickered. "You weren't supposed to see that yet," he said. "That's not an answer." He stepped inside. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it," she said. "Because from what I read, it sounds like you're building a system that reads people's faces to manipulate what they see." "It was meant for mental health applications," he said quietly. "Adaptive support, but the board wanted monetization." "I've been trying to pull it back into research." Vanessa stared at him. "So it's out of your control," he hesitated. "I didn't say that." She stepped back. "Then you let it happen." Victor closed the space between them. "I made a mistake. I let them move while I was distracted." Vanessa's voice cracked. "With me," he didn't answer. She shook her head. "I thought I knew what this was, but if you can lie by omission about something like this, I wasn't lying," he said, his voice low. "I was trying to protect what we were building." Her eyes burned. "You don't get to make that decision for me." Silence stretched between them, heavy and taut. Then Victor said, "I'll shut it down." Vanessa blinked. "What? I'll pull it. Kill the project. I don't care what it costs." Her breath hitched. "Why would you do that?" "Because I don't want to lose you," he said. "And because you're right." She looked at him, torn between disbelief and something deeper, something breaking open. "I need time," she said finally. He nodded once. "Then take it." He left without another word. And for the first time since they met, the space between them didn't feel electric. It felt like silence. Vanessa hadn't returned to the Thorne tech office in 5 days. She hadn't answered any of Victor's calls, either not because she wanted to punish him, but because she needed space to figure out what was real. What she felt. What he felt. Whether any of this had a foundation stronger than attraction and expensive gestures. But on the 6th morning, she woke to find an envelope slid under her apartment door. No name. No return address. Inside was a handwritten letter, 3 sentences. "I've canceled the Millionaire division. The board is furious, but I'm not losing you to silence." She stared at the words, her breath catching. The strokes were sharp, deliberate. No embellishments, no manipulation. A statement of action, not emotion. And yet it hit her harder than any apology ever could. Still, she didn't rush to him. Instead, that afternoon, she visited her old professor doctor. Helen Marks, who had once told her that ethics wasn't about being perfect. It was about choosing better when no one was watching. They sat in a quiet cafe tucked between a bookstore and a florist. Vanessa stirred her tea more than she drank it. "I don't know how to trust someone who's lived in a world I can't even imagine," she said finally. "It's like we speak different languages. He makes a phone call and companies shift. I send a resume and wait 3 weeks to be ghosted." Helen folded her hands. "Do you think he sees you as a project?" "No," Vanessa said without hesitation. "I think he sees me as a mirror, and I think that scares him." Helen nodded slowly. "Sometimes the people with the most power are the ones who need grounding the most." That night, Vanessa opened her laptop and began drafting a new policy framework, one designed to prevent future misuse of biometric data. She didn't know if Victor would accept it. She didn't even know if she'd return. But she knew this. She couldn't walk away without at least trying to shape the thing she'd been invited to challenge. 3 days later, her phone rang. Unknown number. Vanessa Avery? A clipped British voice asked. Yes, you're listed as a guest on Mr. Thorne's clearance for the New York Tech Ethics Gala this evening. He's asked me to confirm your attendance. She paused. I wasn't invited. He said you were the keynote speaker. Before she could respond, the line disconnected. Vanessa stood in her apartment, stunned. She hadn't agreed to attend. She hadn't agreed to speak. But somehow he was already building a stage for her voice. That night, she arrived at the gala in a tailored navy jumpsuit she'd borrowed from Zoe. She wasn't going to pretend to be someone she wasn't. She didn't need glitter or silk. She needed clarity. The venue was a converted observatory, glass walls, domed ceiling. The city lights below looked like stars had fallen to earth. She spotted Victor near the back of the room, standing alone in front of a large display board highlighting Thorne Tech's new transparency initiative. He turned the moment he saw her. Vanessa crossed the floor slowly, each step measured. You made me keynote speaker, she said as she reached him. I figured it was the only way to guarantee you'd show up. You're unbelievable, she muttered. I didn't want a microphone, he said. I wanted to give it to you. Vanessa studied him. He looked different, not less powerful but stripped of the protective layers he usually wore, the tailored confidence, the polished deflection. He looked like a man who had taken a fall and was standing back up with nothing but honesty. You shut down a division that would have made you hundreds of millions, she said. It would have cost me more to keep it, he replied. She tilted her head. Your board won't forgive you, they'll recover. And what about us? She asked. Victor stepped closer. I don't want something perfect. I want something real, even if it's messy, even if it scares the hell out of me, Vanessa swallowed. You can't fix everything with money, I know, he said, but I can listen, I can change, I can show up. The lights dimmed and the host called her name. Vanessa turned toward the stage, heart pounding. She walked up the steps, took the mic, and faced the crowd: executives, engineers, journalists, donors. All of them waiting to hear what the mystery keynote speaker would say. She looked at Victor. Then she began. Power without accountability is dangerous, but power with humility, that's transformation. Tonight, I'm not here to praise a company. I'm here to demand better from them, from you, from all of us. There was no applause at first, just silence. Then someone clapped, then another. Then the room erupted. When she stepped off the stage, Victor met her at the base of the steps. You didn't hold back, he said. I wasn't supposed to, she replied. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. She opened it. It was a printout of the first email she'd sent him, the one after the webinar. He'd carried it with him. I told you, he said. You made me feel seen. Vanessa looked up at him, every wall she'd built cracking just enough to let the truth in. Then see this, she said. I'm not walking behind you, I walk beside you, or not at all. Victor reached for her hand, not to pull her closer, but to anchor himself. Beside me, he said. Always. And for the first time since that seminar, she believed him. Victor stood in the middle of his penthouse's private terrace, staring out at the city he had once thought he controlled. The skyline was a jagged silhouette against the midnight blue sky, the buildings glowing like embers. But tonight, none of it made him feel powerful. Not the height, not the silence, not even the ownership. It felt like a reminder of how much he had to unlearn. Behind him, footsteps. He didn't turn until she spoke. I didn't expect to feel calm tonight, Vanessa said, walking toward him, heels silent on the polished tile. But I do. He turned to face her. I was afraid you wouldn't come. I almost didn't, she said. But then I realized something. She stopped a few feet away. Her arms were at her sides, relaxed, but her eyes were focused. I don't want to be someone who steps away from something just because it's complicated, she continued. You told me once that you weren't playing games. I believe you, but I needed to see if you could handle the truth without trying to control it. Victor nodded slowly. And you did more than that, she said. You actually listened. He exhaled, tension breaking apart in his shoulders like ice cracking under heat. I've spent a long time building a world where no one could touch me, he said. But you walked in and dismantled it without even raising your voice. She stepped closer. That's not entirely true. I've raised my voice plenty. Victor allowed a brief, genuine laugh. Fair. Vanessa looked around the terrace, then down at the small table set behind him, a single-place setting. A white plate, a candle, and a bowl of sliced mango. She blinked. Is that? I remembered you said mango was your comfort food, he said. The ones in the store weren't ripe enough, so I had them flown in from India. Her eyebrows rose. That's completely irrational, I know, he said. But I didn't want to get it wrong. She sat down, picked up a slice, and bit into it. Perfect, she said. You're still impossible, but this is perfect. He leaned on the railing, watching her for a moment. I've been offered board seats on 5 new companies since the gala, he said. Turn them all down. Vanessa looked up. Why? Because I want to build something with you, not just reputationally, actually build something that lasts, she tilted her head. Like what? A new ethics institute, independent, funded with my personal capital but operated by people you trust. You'd lead it. Vanessa froze for a moment, her lips parting. That's not a gesture, that's a legacy. I know, he said, and I want it to have your name. She looked at him for a long moment, then stood. I don't need a monument, she said, but I'll take a mission. Victor nodded. Done? She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Then here's my condition. He accepted it cautiously, unfolding it. It was a list, not long, non-negotiables, Vanessa said. Autonomy, transparency, checks on power, and no anonymous donations. Victor scanned it. All of this makes sense. I'm tired of people saying that only visionaries get to bend the rules, she said. I want to prove that integrity can scale. He looked up from the page. You already are. Vanessa stepped close enough that the hem of her coat brushed his. I never expected this, she said. Not you, not the gala, not any of it. Neither did I. She looked up at him, her voice low, but I'm not afraid of where we're going anymore. Victor reached for her hand. I'm not either. They stood there, silent for a moment, until she gave a soft laugh. What? I just realized something, she said. You've never actually asked me a proper question. He raised an eyebrow. A question? A real one, not a pitch, not an offer. A question that puts you on the line. Victor held her gaze for a long moment. Then he stepped back, reached into his coat, and pulled out a ring box. Vanessa's lips parted. I wasn't planning to do this here, he said. But maybe that's the point. He opened it. Inside was a ring unlike anything she'd expected, no giant stone, no ornate setting. Just a platinum band with a single, brilliant cut sapphire. I didn't fall in love because you challenged me, he said. I fell in love because you didn't care who I was supposed to be. You just saw me and made me want to earn that. She looked at the ring, then at him. So, he said. Vanessa Avery. Will you marry me not because it's perfect, not because it's easy, but because it's real? She didn't speak immediately. She stepped forward, took his face in her hands, and kissed him. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. Victor slid the ring onto her finger, his hand steady. Beneath them, the city pulsed. Above them, the stars didn't just shine. They bore witness. Later that night, they sat on the terrace floor, backs against the wall, plates empty beside them. No plans, no meetings. Just breathe and laughter and the kind of silence that was full, not empty. Vanessa leaned her head on his shoulder. I don't want a fairy tale, she said. I want a future. Victor pressed a kiss to her temple. Then let's build it, he said, together, and they did. The vineyard estate sat quietly under a golden afternoon sun, a place Victor had purchased years earlier but never visited. Back then, he'd bought it because it looked like a good investment. Now, it felt like the kind of place you built a life in, not because of its potential value, but because of what you could grow there. Vanessa stood barefoot in the field between the rows of young vines, her fingers trailing along the soft leaves. The breeze tugged at the hem of her linen dress, and the sound of distant birdsong filled the space between the hills. Victor approached from behind, his steps slow, deliberate. He didn't speak until he was close enough for her to hear without turning. "I've been thinking about how this place used to mean nothing to me," he said. "Now I can't imagine it without you in it." Vanessa smiled without looking at him. "It's strange how fast some things can change. Not the kind of fast that burns out, but the kind that roots deep before you realize it." He stepped beside her, glancing down at her hand, his ring glinting in the sunlight. "I've made a lot of decisions in boardrooms, signed things others would hesitate to even read. But saying yes to you was the first time I felt like I was signing my name to something that mattered." She turned to face him fully. "I've been offered a position at MIT, not full-time, a guest program, just a few months a year." His brows lifted. "That's incredible." "I wasn't going to tell you yet. I didn't want you to think I was stepping away." "I wouldn't," he said. "But I would ask if I could come with you, or visit every week, or fly you back in between classes." She laughed softly. "You do that, I'd do more. I'd sit in the back row and take notes." "Please don't," she said. "You'd make all the postdocs nervous." Victor reached for her hand. "You've never had to choose between ambition and love with me, and you never will." Vanessa nodded slowly. "Then I'll accept the offer." They walked back toward the stone house that overlooked the valley. Inside, everything smelled like lavender and fresh wood. The walls were lined with canvases Vanessa had painted over the last few months, not for galleries, not for show, but because she needed color in her days and movement in her hands. In the kitchen, a woman in her 60s, Marisol, the house's caretaker since before Victor bought it, was arranging fresh herbs in a ceramic bowl. "Dinner's almost ready," she said without looking up. "And don't forget, you two have company tonight." Victor looked at Vanessa. "Did you invite them?" She smiled. "I did. Thought you should meet the people I learned from." That evening, the long wooden table was surrounded by faces Vanessa had known since college: mentors, old colleagues, even a few former students. They spoke over roasted vegetables and local wine, laughter curling into the air with the scent of rosemary. Victor sat beside her, not as the host, not as the man with the deepest pockets in the room, but as her equal. He listened to stories, asked questions, and when pressed told a few of his own. Nothing about deals or headlines. Just the memory of how he used to spend nights reading code until dawn, how he once broke $1 million server because he'd written one line wrong. When the evening ended and the guests trickled out into the night, Vanessa leaned back in her chair and looked at him across the table. "You're different here," she said. "I'm more myself here," he replied. She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "So am I." Later, they sat on the hill behind the house, the stars above them so clear they looked close enough to touch. Victor lay back on the grass, one arm tucked behind his head. "I used to think love would distract me from everything I'd worked for. And now," she asked, lying beside him. "Now I know it's the only thing that made any of it worth it." She turned her head toward him. "You still working on that ethics institute?" "I hired the team last week," he said. "They're already building the framework. And I reserved one seat on the advisory board that only you can fill. I already gave you my terms. I've got every word framed in my office." She laughed. "Of course you do." They lay in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Then Victor turned toward her and said, "There's one more thing I haven't told you." Vanessa lifted an eyebrow. "That's ominous." "I bought the building where we met." She sat up. "The seminar building? Why?" "I'm turning it into a tech education center, free programs, community run." "With a scholarship in your name?" She stared at him, stunned. "You're serious?" "I wanted the place where I first saw you to become a place where people like you could thrive." Vanessa leaned down and kissed him, not because it was romantic, not because he'd done something grand, but because he'd finally understood the kind of power that mattered. Years later, that vineyard house became their home, the one they returned to between speaking engagements, research trips, and long stretches of quiet work. They married there, under the same trees where they'd first talked about the future. No press, no investors, just the people who knew them before the world did. They didn't build a life that fit into headlines, they built something stronger. And every time Vanessa walked through the front door after a long week, And every time Victor looked up from whatever paper or plan he was working on, they remembered what it felt like to be chosen not for what they had, but for who they were. And they never stopped choosing each other.